Alright, let's look at Unit 3, U.S. History, and let's see if we can prepare. Alright, let's look back and review. We did Unit 1, Unit 2, and we're going to do Unit 3 now. Unit 1 covered Standard 1, Standard 2, and Standard 3, and it was titled The Colonial Era. And Unit 2 was over Standard 4 and 5, and we talked about the Revolution to the United States Constitution. Unit 3 is going to cover Standard 6 and 7, and this is titled Creating a New Nation. Alright, so let's look at Standard 6. The student will analyze the impact of territorial expansion and population growth and its impact in early decades of the new nation. Notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 substandards, A, B, C, D, E. And in this class we're going to focus on these standards. We're going to learn the language of the standards. So Standard 6, the overall standard, is the student would analyze. This is what we have to do. We have to analyze. Okay, and we're going to be looking at the impact of things on the early new nation, the United States. Alright, so the impact of territorial expansion and population growth. We're going to have population growth going on in the United States, and this territorial expansion, these new lands out west we're going to get. What's the impact of those on the early decades of the new nation? So what we're going to be talking about is the new nation. How is it going to deal with territorial growth? How's it going to deal with this population growth? How's it going to deal with the expansion of democracy and the growth of a national economy? That's what we're going to be looking at. Alright, so 6A says explain the Northwest Ordinance's importance. First of all, we've got to talk about what is the Northwest Ordinance and its importance in westward migration of Americans. There's 1. On slavery, 2. Public education, 3. And the addition of new states is 4 different things. So our focus here is on, we have to explain Northwest Ordinance impact. Okay, the impact of the Northwest Ordinance. So we have 4 elements. Westward migration of Americans, and the theme there is going to be expansion in the Ohio River Valley. 2, slavery, and that's going to be political and social interactions, beginning of abolitionism or the ending of slavery. 3, public education, political and social education, public schools, and the addition of new states and how to deal with territorial growth would be a theme there. So let's start with what is the Northwest Ordinance. What is it? Okay. You know, in the last unit we talked about the Articles of Confederation, and if we look at the Northwest Ordinance, it was passed in 1787. And 1787, you know, the Articles of Confederation was the government. The Confederation Congress was making the decision. So in 1787 the Constitution had not yet been ratified, so we're still running on the Articles of Confederation. We talked about a lot of its weaknesses in Shays' Rebellion as a reason why we needed the Constitution, so we focused mostly on its weaknesses. One of the strengths it had was the passage of the Northwest Ordinance. That's one of its successes, the Land Ordinance and then the Northwest Ordinance. So it did do something right. So our essential questions for this 6A is, how did the Northwest Ordinance impact westward migration of Americans? And then 2, how did the Northwest Ordinance impact slavery? And then 3, how did the Northwest Ordinance impact public education? And then how did the Northwest Ordinance impact the addition of new states? Those are the questions we need to answer. So what is the Northwest Ordinance? Before we get this Northwest Ordinance, we're going to talk about the Northwest Territory. And to fully understand the Northwest Ordinance, we have to understand what the Northwest Territory is. So the Northwest Territory is the area north of the Ohio River and west of the Mississippi River, and southwest of the Great Lakes area. Alright, so this area in light green here, that would eventually become Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. But at this time, it's not these states. It's just this land area. We're talking about Northwest Territory, north of the Ohio River here. Now, out here in this area, after the American Revolution, after we create our Constitution, we have our new government. Out here, we have a lot of French traders still trading with the Native Americans. We still have British forts out here in this area, and they refuse to leave this area because the French, the Indian Native American fur trade is still lucrative, and so they don't want to leave. They refuse to leave this area. It's going to be a source of the War of 1812, a cause of the War of 1812. So we had the British fort still occupied by the British, and we had some French out here. Native Americans in a few treaties had given up their claim on the land and relinquished that claim. So the United States government wanted to settle this area to make sure, or to protect it against encroachments by the French or the Spanish or the British or the Native Americans, anyone. So they're going to set up this plan to settle this area quickly. And that's what they want to do with the land ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. So this western territory out here past the Appalachian Mountains, they want to settle this area with American colonists. Okay. All right. So the land ordinance of 1785 is the first law that's passed by the Confederation Congress, and this basically sets up a way to survey this land in the Northwest Territory. How do we survey it? And they're going to survey it what we call townships and what we call sections. So if we look at it, a township is going to be 6 square miles. One township or range block here in this is going to be 6 square miles. That's a township. Okay. It's going to be measured out east-west and north-south lines. So it's going to be making a square. And this plan is going to survey and sell this land. It's going to etch into the map of the United States these rectangular patterns within this Northwest Territory. So if we went there today in Indiana and Ohio here, and we looked at it closely at the landforms, we would see rectangular patterns much like these here. So a township was 6 square miles. Within that township there were 36 sections, what we call sections, and here's an inlet here, the 13th, and it shows you this section is 1 square mile. Okay. And that's how they were going to survey this land, and they were going to sell. Each section would be 640 acres. Each section here would be 640 acres. And what they would do is auction off one section like this in the green for no less than $1. So each section here would cost $640. And they would sell it off. This is a way that they could get money for the new United States government and allow people to go out and buy these areas. Okay. So this is how they survey this land into townships of 36, 6 square miles, 36 sections within this township, and each section is going to be 640 square miles. So for $1 per mile, it'll be $640, and that's how it's going to be chopped up. Now, let's go there and let's look on the map. Here's Google Maps. Here's a picture of the United States. If we got a way to go to Google Maps, we can turn this into a, if we get closer here, we want to look at Ohio here, and we can turn this into a satellite image, and we can zoom down a little closer. Let's go down here a little closer. Let's look at this. Notice how the land starts to chop up into blocks here and how the streets run. Look at that. Those rectangular patterns, squared up patterns of the land is still shown today through the roads and the land there today, if we went there today and looked at those fields and roads, how they're rectangular shaped. This is a product of the Northwest Ordinance, our land ordinance of 1784. Okay, you get the point there. Take Google Images and look around, you'll see those little rectangular patterns. Okay, and those come from this land ordinance, how the land was surveyed and chopped up for sale. So the Northwest Ordinance is going to come in 1787. Northwest Ordinance is 1787. The Northwest Ordinance is let's say 2 years past the land ordinance, which surveys up the land. Northwest Ordinance is going to establish these rules that's going to govern the Northwest Territory. So everything that goes on here, you know, this Northwest Ordinance is going to establish those rules that govern that. And it's also going to establish a formal process that if future territories want to become states, how do they do it? What must they do? What steps must they follow to transform themselves from a territory into a state? And that's going to have some huge impact on the history of the United States. Alright, so explain the Northwest Ordinance impact on public education. Okay. So our essential question was, how did the Northwest Ordinance impact public education? You know, when we divided the township up into 6 square miles and then the section into 1 square mile, the Northwest Ordinance, one of the rules it said had to happen with the survey and the sale of the land is that the 16th section here, the money that was gained from the sale of it, the 16th section, would finance and support public education. So the Northwest Ordinance really encouraged townships to establish public schools. So that's how it's going to impact public education. A lot of civic learning, a lot of learning about the history of the United States, about its government, etc. is going to be done in these schools. Okay. So how did the Northwest Ordinance impact public education? It encourages it through the sale of one section, a 16th section of land to support public education. Alright, then it says explain the Northwest Ordinance's importance and the westward migration, or Northwest importance on the addition of new states. So our essential question was, how did the Northwest Ordinance impact the addition of new states? We talked about it a few minutes ago. Establish a process that territories could use to become a state if that territory wanted to. First, it had to set up a temporary government. That temporary government would be a governor, a secretary, and 3 judges. Is what the original territory would be. Temporary government. The second step, once it received 5,000, or I got 5,000 when the population increased, and 5,000 free males who could vote were there in that area, they could set up a temporary territorial assembly. Now this territorial assembly would make laws, but the governor and Congress had veto power over the territorial assembly. And the people who were on the territorial assembly, 5 to 10 names would be thrown in there by Congress. Congress would select who would be on this territorial assembly. And the next step was when 60,000 free males who could vote were in that territory, they could draft a constitution in a special convention there, and then they could send it to Congress and apply for statehood. Now, how does this process impact the addition of new states? Well, this is the process that if a territory wanted to become a new state in the United States, it had to follow these 3 steps. So this procedure sets a precedent that will be followed in every territory in U.S. expansion that wanted to be a state. As it becomes a state in the expansion of the United States all the way to the Pacific Ocean, that every territory wants to be a state has to follow this precedent. And as we keep studying U.S. history, we're going to talk about this expansion westward and how this procedure is going to be used, and sometimes it's going to cause problems. There's going to be some controversies over westward expansion. So as these new territories, the Louisiana Territory that's coming, we're going to talk about Texas, the Mexican Cession, and the Oregon Territory, as they come in and those territories want to become states, like California out here, or Missouri here in the Louisiana Territory here, or Texas as a state. When they want to come in, they have to follow the rules and procedures established by the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. And that's every one of them, all the way out to the Pacific Ocean here. Okay, so territories that wanted to be added as a state had to follow the steps outlined in the Northwest Ordinance. As new territories like Missouri, Maine, Texas, Oregon, California wanted to be added, they had to get the population, adopt a constitution, and elect representatives, etc. That's how it impacts the addition of new states. Alright, explain how the Northwest Ordinance importance on slavery. It simply outlawed slavery. The Northwest Ordinance 1787 said in the Northwest Territory there would be no slaves. So there would be no slaves at all out here in this new territory. Totally outlawed. Alright, so how does that influence, how does this importance influence beyond just that? Well, for one thing, in the schools that's going to be in the Northwest Territory, settlers in the citizenship there, settlers there are going to be guaranteed freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and other rights. But as far as slavery goes, it's going to be totally outlawed. And we're going to see from that in this Northwest Territory here, from the Mississippi River all the way over in this Northwest Territory, slavery will be outlawed. But eventually, above the Mason-Dixon line here, we're going to see a lot of emancipation things go on, a lot of abolitionist movement kick out. And when that happens, we're going to have this Northwest Territory over in this northeast area over here. This whole region, northern region, will become opposed to slavery. And that's going to sectionalize the country, because the South is going to depend on slavery because of intensive agriculture, and then the North does not depend on slavery, and that's going to be a sectional divide or conflict that's going to happen in the future. But it's this Northwest Territory that's going to set up this opportunity for the Northeast and the Northwest Territory to become anti-slavery or opposed to slavery and create this regional culture that opposes slavery. Okay, explain the Northwest Ordinance's importance in the westward migration of Americans. Okay, so how did the Northwest Ordinance impact the westward migration of Americans? This land is going to be cheap and affordable land. At first, it's going to be not too affordable for average people. Large landowners are going to go in there and gobble up a lot of that land. But eventually, laws are going to be changed and relaxed, where other citizens that can go in there and buy it cheaper. So a lot of Americans are going to migrate out to the Northwest Territory. This migration theme we're talking about. They're going to move out there and migrate and settle in that area. So that's going to create, this westward movement, a westward migration or movement to the west. So it's going to encourage, through cheap and affordable land, the building of communities out west. Okay, so we had 5 different things here. Okay, first, the Northwest Ordinance is going to sell one section of land to finance public education, and then it's going to outlaw slavery. And it's going to establish a process where territories in the future that want to become states have to follow. And this is going to hurt Native Americans, because it's going to encourage manifest destiny, this westward expansion of the United States. So here we have this huge impact of the Northwest Ordinance 1787. Cause and effect. What's going to happen? Alright, so in your notes, you might want to draw images like this to help you remember. We call these concept graphic organizers or mind mapping organizers. Use this as a strategy to remember information. Draw little things like this to help you. So this is the impact of the Northwest Ordinance. It's going to encourage westward expansion or manifest destiny, migration westward. That's going to hurt Native Americans. It's going to establish a process where a territory could become a state. And that's going to be followed all the way to the Pacific Ocean. It's going to outlaw slavery, and then one section of land is going to be sold to finance public schools and education. Now you could also use a map and kind of relate it to this Northwest Territory. Slavery not allowed, religious toleration and freedom of speech, hurt Native Americans, one section sold to finance public education, set up a process where territories could become states, and encourage westward expansion and migration westward. Anything that works for you, I suggest you do it. You know, if these mind mapping things do, I like these. And then here's some visuals to kind of connect you to. Use all of them if you have to. So our original questions were, how did Northwest Ordinance impact westward migration? How did it impact slavery? How did it impact public education? How did it impact the addition of new states? So westward migration is going to encourage by providing cheap land for sale. That in turn is going to hurt Native Americans who lose their land. Slavery is going to outlaw slavery in the Northwest Territory. Public education, one section of land is going to be sold to finance public schools, and establish a process, a formal process that future territories could use to become states. And that's the impact of the Northwest Ordinance. That's it for 6A. I hope that helps you. Good luck to you on the test. Analyze the impact of territorial expansion and population growth and its impact in the early decades of the new nation. Notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 substandards, A, B, C, D, E. And in this class we're going to focus on these standards. We're going to learn the language of the standards. So standard 6, the overall standard, is the student would analyze. This is what we have to do. We have to analyze. Okay, and we're going to be looking at the impact of things on the early new nation, United States. Alright, so the impact of territorial expansion and how to deal with territorial growth would be a theme there. So let's start with, what is the Northwest Ordinance? What is it? Okay. You know, in the last unit we talked about the Articles of Confederation, and if we look at the Northwest Ordinance, it was passed in 1787. And 1787, you know, the Articles of Confederation was the government. The Confederation Congress was making the decision. So in 1787 the Constitution had not yet been ratified. So we're still running on the Article of Population Growth. We're going to have population growth going on in the United States, and this territorial expansion, these new lands out west we're going to get. What's the impact of those on the early decades of the new nation? So what we're going to be talking about is the new nation. How is it going to deal with territorial growth? How's it going to deal with this population growth? How's it going to deal with the expansion of democracy and the growth of a national economy? That's what we're going to be looking at. Alright, so 6A says, explain the Northwest Ordinance's importance. First of all, we've got to talk about what is the Northwest Ordinance and its importance in West. Alright, let's look at Unit 3, U.S. History, and let's see if we can prepare. Alright, let's look back and review. We did Unit 1, Unit 2, and we're going to do Unit 3 now. Unit 1 covered Standard 1, Standard 2, and Standard 3, and it was titled the Colonial Era. And Unit 2 was over Standard 4 and 5, and we talked about the revolution to the United States Constitution. Unit 3 is going to cover Standard 6 and 7, and this is titled Creating a New Nation. Alright, so let's look at Standard 6. The student westward migration of Americans, there's 1. On slavery, 2. Public education, 3. And the addition of new states is 4 different things. So our focus here is on, we have to explain Northwest Ordinance impact. Okay, the impact of the Northwest Ordinance. So we have 4 elements. Westward migration of Americans, and the theme there is going to be expansion in the Ohio River Valley. 2, slavery, and that's going to be political and social interactions, beginning of abolitionism or the ending of slavery. 3. Public education, political and social education, public schools, and the addition of new states